Welcome, everyone. Today's guest is Lieutenant General Jeffrey Buchanan, retired after 37 years in the U.S. Army. He led troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, commanded disaster relief in Puerto Rico, and played a key role in national crisis response. He's a true leader in and out of uniform. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks, Danny. It's a pleasure to be able to join you.
Definitely. The first topic I'd like to discuss with you is your leadership philosophy. As I mentioned, you've been in the military for almost 40 years, and I can imagine that your approach to leadership has also evolved as you spend time in the military, in combat, disaster relief. So, what is your approach to leadership, and what is the philosophy behind it?
What's interesting is I've taught a lot of classes. I do some guest lectures from time to time at MBA courses or something like that. And when these professors bring me in, they want me to talk about leadership. And so I usually start out with a question for the audience, for the participants in the class, because especially if it's a grad school class, I want them to think and have a discussion. It should not be a lecture from me. So I ask them, what do you think the difference is between leadership and management? And I tell them up front, I said, look, I'm not looking for a book definition. I'm not even sure there's really a right answer. I just want to know what you think to get the creative juices flowing. And I get all kinds of ideas, of course. I get comments that, management is about things, leadership is about people. They know I'm there to talk about leadership. So sometimes some of them will say, look, management is bad, leadership is good. And after I get all that, then I tell them what I think. And I say, first of all, management's not bad and leadership isn't inherently good. I can make a pretty good case that Adolf Hitler was one of the most effective leaders in the history of the world, but it is truly an evil person. So leadership is not by definition good. But the way I look at it, management, in the simplest way I can think of it is this: management is making stuff happen, and leadership is influencing people to make stuff happen. Now, it's not that people aren't part of the management equation, but the big idea on leadership is they are the critical component of any leadership equation. It's about people. It's about relationships, down the chain of command, up the chain of command, out to stakeholders or considerations of other people. It's all about people and relationships. And in that regard, I think about, well, so if leadership is about influence, it's about influencing people. How do you influence people? What's the most effective way to influence them? And to me, it's always boiled down to leading by example. If you want your team to behave a certain way, you got to start out by ensuring that you're behaving that way. You have to show people instead of just tell them what to do. You have to show them, and it's always trying to set the example for others so that you pull them with you instead of pushing them into an area that you're not.
Thank you for this explanation. When you were talking about that, leading by example, something that popped into my mind was um, there's probably always a balance and between leading by example, showing, and then just commanding, just giving, commands to the troops. And this reminded me of the book Dichotomy of Leadership, which I just today I drove around to give it to my friend as a gift by Jocko Willink. So, do you agree that there is always a balance between, just telling what to do and inspiring people, leading by example?
Well, I once upon a time I went to graduate school and I actually got a degree in this stuff in leadership development. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of theories. I'll try to boil them down. One style or one idea about leadership is that leadership is transactional. And another one is that it's transformational. Okay. And those are not the same thing. Now, I'm going to talk about the extremes and then talk about what real life is probably like. So, transactional leadership is based on social exchange theory. In other words, the leader provides benefits to the people being led. And of course, they provide benefits back. There's this social exchange. And the leader, you think about it as a system of rewards and punishments. If you do a good job, you're going to get rewarded. You're going to get a raise. You're going to get extra days off, whatever the case may be, a promotion. If you don't go to do a good job, you're going to get punished. You might get demoted. You might get fired. So it's based on a system of rewards and punishments. Transformational leadership, on the other end, seeks to inspire and transform people. And to cause them to behave in a certain way because they believe in the character or they believe in the overall values, the purpose of the organization. They have faith and believe in the character of the leader. That's a little bit different. For transactional leadership to work, the leader, or at least the leader's dictates, have to be present. You have to be noticed for rewards or punishments in order to get the rewards or punishment. But transformational leadership doesn't require the leader to be present at all. In fact, that could be inspiring. You could be inspiring somebody from far away from a long time ago. Or, that inspiration could come from a time in the past. Now, those are the extremes. I like to think I'm transformational, and that's what I strive to be. But the fact is, there's always an element of transactional as well. If you don't do a good job, I'm going to work with you to do a better job, but at some point in time, you might need to be fired. But what I hope is that you're not doing a good job just because of what's in it for you, this reward and punishment. It's because you believe in the greater good and you're trying to strive and you're inspired by others and you're trying to be inspirational to your team. So I think there is a balance. I described the two extremes, but real life is really a blend of both of them.
Yeah, that's a very nice take. I love it. I want to switch to another topic just as interesting as leadership, which I'm currently, I'm living in this very turbulent part of my life, and I see it a lot. It is uncertainty. You, as a general, as a leader, you probably faced a lot of that on the battlefield, um, dealing with hurricanes, disaster relief. And when you have so much on the line, not only your life, but the life of your people, your friends, every little piece of news might have a very emotional toll on yourself, which can affect your decision making. So I'm curious to learn, how did you learn to deal with uncertainty, and what's your approach to this?
Well, there's a couple of different directions I'd like to take the answer. So one, I'll talk about uncertainty, but I also want to talk about how do you process information, okay? And they're related. So I'll start with the information piece. None of us knows everything. And so, what you hope to do as a leader when it comes to decision making is have enough information to make the best decisions in a timely fashion. And I think that what's really important is that we all have different comfort areas and we have different styles. Some people, and I'll tell you a quick story about that, but some people are very comfortable making decisions with a little bit of information, and other people want a lot more information. Um, I'm going to tell a story about it, but I want to come back to the overall question, and that is, you know, uncertainty. The less information you have, the more uncertainty you have, and potentially the more risk you have. And so some people are comfortable with more risk than other people. Some people want a pretty solid answer before they will launch, and others are comfortable with more uncertainty and more risk. And that doesn't mean that they're irresponsible, but they're comfortable making decisions with less information. So here's the story, and I'll try not to take too much time. I'm mindful of how much time we have, but this was one of my tours in Iraq. I was deputy division commander, and I came in off of a battlefield one night, hot and sweaty, unloaded my rifle, went into my headquarters, and my boss was very agitated. And he was a wonderful guy, and he worked for a wonderful guy. But those two guys did not get along real well. And so he was agitated and bothered by something going on at our higher headquarters. And I asked him what was wrong, and he said, what we have is a conflict of decision-making style. And I'm sure I gave him the RCA dog look, what are you talking about? And he said, okay, let me use a medical analogy. He said, some people are emergency room doctors. They they have all this information, comes at them really quickly. They got to make some snap decisions. And especially if you think about a mass casualty event, they're having to triage people and stabilize patients. They're making decisions, and they make decisions. They're comfortable making quick decisions with about 60% of the information. So now the next group of guys, let's call them surgeons. Surgeons want 90% of the information before they make a decision. And, and they almost always make the right decision, and it almost always does good for the patient. But sometimes the patient's got to get really sick before he sees a surgeon, because it takes a lot more time for the surgeon to act. He said, now the last group of guys, they always operate with 100% of the information, and they always make the right decision. He said, the problem is we call them pathologists. And so I said, okay, well, initially I took the wrong lesson, because my boss was an obvious emergency room doctor. He made decisions quickly. I said, so it's better to be an emergency room doctor. And I am too. I'm very comfortable making decisions in a hurry with just a little bit of information. And I am very tolerant of risk. Some people are not. They are not tolerant of risk. And so this is different. And so my initial lesson was, oh, it's better to be this. And he said, no, you got it all wrong. It's not better. The point is, you need to know yourself. If this is what you're comfortable with, you need to know that. And you need to share that with the team, because every style has weaknesses. If you're going to be an emergency room doctor, you need to be aware that you might make bad decisions because you're making them in such a hurry. So you might need to change your mind. And if you're going to be a surgeon, you need to figure out, how am I going to keep this patient healthy while you're waiting for more and more information? So I was mindful of that when I got this team for Hurricane Harvey. I had soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines come and join our task force from all over the United States. Now, my own troops in my Army command knew me and knew how I operated, but these people didn't know me from Adam. So I told them this story, and I said, look, here's the deal. I'm an emergency room doctor. If you bring something to me that even hints like you want a decision, you're going to get a decision. I said, so if you don't want me to make a decision, start out with, sir, please don't decide on this. This is just for your information only. And likewise, sometimes I'm going to decide to go left, and 3 days later, you're going to come across a key nugget of information that says, man, we need to go right now. Then you have a responsibility, not just a right, but a responsibility to come and tell me, turn right now. And I recognize, nobody likes to change your mind, but I recognize that sometimes I decide things in such a hurry that it's not always the best decision. So it's not better to be one or the other. What's most important is that you know what your tendencies are, and then you share that with the team so that they can mitigate the weaknesses in your style, whatever that is. Hopefully that makes sense to you.
Yeah, definitely. So first part is you have to know yourself. Second is you have to communicate that to your team, and that's how you operate efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all the case I laid out was about decision making and comfort with information or lack thereof, and how much risk you're willing to tolerate,
Mhm. Yeah,
which is related to certainty and uncertainty. Obviously, the more information you have, the less uncertain it is and the lower the risk.
got it. Got it. Thank you for sharing that. Um, you mentioned that you work a lot with disaster relief, hurricanes, but also combat Iraq, Afghanistan. It might be a weird question to ask, but what did you enjoy more, combat or homeland security and disaster relief?
Hmm. Well, it's not a weird question to ask. It might be a weird question to answer. You know, so I will say this. There is no bond tighter between warriors, men and women, than when they experience combat together. Um, you know, shared hardship produces a lasting bond and a love for each other that's hard to describe. That doesn't mean that I didn't have some really bad days. When I lost my troops, handing a flag at a funeral to a young wife at one point in time. I hate it, but I love it. I don't like doing that, but there's no place that I'd rather be, if that makes sense to you. Um, and the same thing goes for losing troops. The the positive side was that, I believed in us, I believed in our mission, I believed in that we were serving the United States and our Constitution. So I could hang my hat on this is for a good cause, but it's still painful individually to lose friends and deal with that. Um, on the disaster relief side, one thing that was fundamentally different. First of all, there's shared hardship, but it wasn't. It was much more rare for us on the responders to be in a life-threatening situation like I was regularly in combat. So there's shared hardship, but it wasn't the same sort of shared danger. Um, what was different though was that instead of, working for the betterment of Iraqi civilians or Afghan civilians, now I was actually getting able to help my own countrymen, in Puerto Rico or in Texas or California, and that is very rewarding in and of itself because we in the military spend a lot of time on the away team. And to be able to do it a little bit, at least at home, and serve directly our own countrymen is pretty powerful.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what you're saying now, makes me wonder, God forbid, but if the US is at war with another nation, you would feel both as a general, as a leader, because you would fight for your country, for your people, and have this shared experience.
Yeah.
Um, so hopefully that will not happen anytime soon, but that's probably the time when you can feel both, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I felt that. I felt like when I was deployed overseas in Iraq or Afghanistan, I was there for the mission, for my country, for my own troops, trying to save lives and everything. But But when I look at the people we were directly serving in those situations, it was Afghan civilians or Iraqi civilians that we were trying to help them, have a better way of life. And and much more indirectly, that was still serving the people of my own country. But that's very different than saving lives in the United States, you know.
Yeah, yeah, makes complete sense. How was your transition to civilian life? If I'm not mistaken, it was 2019.
2019, I retired from the Army. Um, you know, um, I'll tell you a story, and we'll all face transitions. So, one thing that I say when I'm giving some advice to others is, first of all, you have no idea how tired you really are. So you need to take some time to rest, both physically and mentally. And what I did is I decided I had an opportunity that's kind of unique. I had a buddy that runs a charter fishing boat out of Homer, Alaska, and his deckhand was going back to college. And he asked me to come to work for him as a deckhand for a month,
Mm.
the last of the fishing season. So I went up to Alaska and, I learned all kinds of things, in particular about the boat, about safety, about rigging these fishing reels. We get a new set of clients every day. We take out fishing for halibut and salmon, and I'd teach them how to catch this fish and they help them get the big fish in, because they would need help getting those fish on deck. And when we're headed back, I'm filleting all the fish and at the end of the day, cleaning the boat and getting it ready for the next day's clients. It was wonderful, partly because my cell phone didn't work out on the water. I wasn't getting, and it was definitely physical. It's hard work, but but I enjoy that. And so it was restful at the same time. But while I was doing all this, and I learned a tremendous amount about things I never knew about, customer service and all these kinds of things. But but one of the key lessons for me is I spent some time thinking about what do I want to do with the next phase of my life. And in the end, I didn't say this is what I want to do, but I did say this is what I don't want to do. I gave myself two criteria. I don't want a regular job, and I don't want to be deployed anymore. I want to be able to, I missed all three of my kids' senior years in high school. I would like to be around a little bit more as a grandfather to help my grandkids. And so from that, I had to learn to say no because I grew up in this culture. We just don't say no. Somebody asks you, can you do something? We're going to take it on as a mission and I'm going to make it happen no matter what. I'm going to try to make this happen. Um, but because I've got a lot of job offers to do all kinds of things, and some of them, in fact, involve deploying overseas, and it's just been easy for me to say no. So I do still do some work. I'm very engaged with volunteer efforts. I'm a commissioner for our game and fish department. That takes up a lot of time and energy. My bachelor's degree is wildlife ecology, so that's the end there. I'm on the state parks board. I'm a ranch liaison for our sheriff. I patrol the mountains on horseback and on foot and in a vehicle here. I'm on several nonprofits, boards of nonprofits, and I do still do some, leader development and consulting and speaking for pay as well. But that doesn't consume as much time as my volunteer efforts and service to others is still there. So service, selfless service, service to the nation, service to other people has always been important in my family. And I knew I wanted to maintain that after I retired. So the transition has been good. It's been interesting, but I'm happy. I'm still pretty busy doing a lot of things, but I'm doing the things that I want to do. And in the end, I didn't have I wasn't one of those guys that had an identity crisis when I took off my uniform because I'm a soldier. And I'll always be a soldier whether I'm wearing a uniform or not.
Yeah, you're right. It's not, what's outside of your control. It's what's within you. You decide who you are, who you want to be. And this makes sense, and I'm happy that you found the way to transition and find this new purpose as a civilian. The very last question to you would be not even a question. If you have any piece of advice or something that you want to share with young Americans listening to this podcast, what would that be?
And for me, it's make a difference for other people. This is not about you. This journey is not just about you. It's about all of us together. So what are you doing to help other people? And, it doesn't have to be throwing on the uniform and, joining the military or working as a cop or a fireman or, a teacher, a nurse. All those things are very admirable professions. But you can do little things even in your own time. You can volunteer, at a soup kitchen. You can you may not be a teacher, but you can volunteer to read to a kindergarten class. There's things you can do to help other people. And I find that giving back to others, volunteer efforts, and serving all the rest of my fellow man is very rewarding and it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference and helps me to feel good about myself. So I would encourage everybody to volunteer.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for joining me today. A lot of very important pieces of advice, stories. I'm very grateful to have you on today. And thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Danny. I appreciate it. Good luck in everything that you do.